Today at Studio Archohm, we try to, and we believe that we are working at a very multidisciplinary level. And with you all, I'd like to try and dismantle that a little bit and understand. So what we did was that we picked a collection of projects, some slightly old, so I apologize if I repeat a couple of them, and some new, and just see how and where this whole journey started. You know, this whole attitude of trying to be multidisciplinary and what does it really mean. And I hope we all find answers to that. So fundamentally for me, I think it's been the team. The fact that our design team is generally a very mixed bag of designers, architects, urban designers, engineers, but also graphic designers, fashion designers, product designers. And so largely the lines get blurred on what is design, what design can do, and how should one approach anything, let alone an architectural project. So I think that's broadly the area where I'd like to touch by trying to look at different facets of design which we got as projects and commissions as architects. So, you know, we get this range of projects and we try and have refreshing approaches to the same. And the reason is, of course, to also keep ourselves entertained, to keep ourselves engaged, to keep ourselves very, very invested in the projects we do. And so, you know, when a client comes for an urban strategy, we end up creating architectural projects out of that. Or when he's coming up with architectural projects as very clear ideas, you know, we try and bring in new programs. Or if he's got a very clear program, we might step back and go towards identity or why a program is needed. So somewhere down the line, because of the collective we are or the kind of work we like to do, there has been a larger vision that drives us, and this entire approach becomes very multi-dimensional. And so it, of course, has a very clear inquiry of contemporary directions in India, in Indian architecture. But in principle, it basically means that we always try to question the brief. And once we do that, I think a lot of clues, a lot of solutions, a lot of ideas really start emerging out of that alone. So here is a series of projects that I kind of take you through, and probably there'll be these commonalities and this kind of the back end that you all will be able to see as why we try and be very multi-dimensional, multidisciplinary. So we, as architects, we were working and we got Mr. Bachchan to, you know, with a question of making his stationery. Now you can't get more fun a project as an architect to design stationery. I'm sure when he started, he really got me a piece of paper saying, this is a logo we generally have, this is the letters I like to write, but I think we need a change. I think we need to move. And so that's really where the journey started. And, you know, so to coming up with a little logo for him or a little hologram for him, or to kind of rethink his roots. I mean, there is no way one needs to define him, but to understand and get clues, and then looking at functionality of everything, of how people could work. So we went to the roots of Allahabad, we got sand from the deep beds of the Sangam, we took that sand back into making paper, massive amount of engineering needed, and, you know, to making it functional, but then hopefully we come with something very simple, something very special. So it's like a paper, when you touch, 4 fingers at the back can actually touch the sands of time, the sands of Allahabad that he really wants to be identified with. So it was not just putting a collection together, it was really the journey that really made it happen. So just a quick video to kind of give you a clarity of that. another interesting project. Now, this is really old project. I really had to dig it out some 12 years back. We were asked to design a washroom, a bathroom from a company in Italy called Rapsel. And they said, just do us bathroom fixtures that, we would like to look at. And then we again went back to look at, what size, how, and we came up to something of a 2 feet by 2 feet bathroom. And the whole idea was to kind of give a toy that people or architects like all of us can play with. And then this got produced, and that's how it got done. So this was really just a single contraption, which could be in multiple materials with all its services into a central shaft. And you had everything in it. It had a water closet on one side, it's got storages, it had shower, wash basin, and the whole piece coming together. Now this 2 feet by 2 feet thing could be middle of a jungle, could be middle of a dresser, could be middle of a large bedroom, or a bathroom with a typical 6 by 6 walls. So that was the whole idea of how, again, from a very simple question of designing some bathroom fittings, one could actually reinterpret the brief and come up with a solution, which is then again a toy that can be, played with. So that was really interesting. Nowadays, we all end up doing large houses, apartments, really crazy contexts. So we recently finished a house, like the name, it's an extremely slim house. This is in pretty much a typical reality of Delhi. It's in South Extension, where you have thousands of houses crammed next to each other, where extremely poor conditions in terms of driving distances, views, neighborhoods. And so it was like it's a slim house, and it was a house all of 12 feet by about 80 feet long. And this 12 feet had to then suddenly fit in every program. So the car is pretty much a reference to the scale that you see. And it's right in the middle of every typical concrete jungle that we all see in today's cities. That's what it was. And so the issues were that every neighbor practically peeping into your own house. So the biggest issue was how to make this house insulated from the visuals of neighborhood, and it's not that, you almost can't have light in because you have got to draw curtains. So every window was pretty much having a blocked panel with concrete itself. So you had stolen views and stolen light coming into the house pretty much in most rooms, most important spaces. So, but fundamentally, being a thin house did not mean one had to beat the ambition. So actually, we went on board saying, we're going to give you a roundabout for your car to turn. We're going to put in a swimming pool. We're going to put in a terrace garden. So we actually stuffed the house actually with more program by just making it vertical with this little box of 12 feet by 80 feet. And so this stacked space could pretty much house everything. So again, extending the program to almost exaggerate the play of having a very tight spot or a tight site condition was something we kind of toiled with. While the interiors, the basics of architecture, the volumes and the light, the materials and the textures, I think the whole play of functionality, the program, kind of always something very core to us, very core to ourselves, was still done. So you still had the volumes inside. You had to basically, calculate every inch, and you had to go through every foot of space to make sure you maxed it in every which way. So that really became one beautiful example of how extremely challenging projects actually start liberating in a different way. So recently, so I'm a big badminton fan, player. I love playing badminton. My daughters play. And recently we got this project to do a badminton academy for Mr. Gopichand. And he is somebody who's already working on a lot of academies. He's running a lot of academies. He was quite clear on what he wanted and how we wanted. And it was fun, but an experience to actually take him back a few steps, almost remind him that why making something iconic, making something playful, which is coming from him, from his name, would actually inspire everybody. Would inspire people in sports, would inspire people in architecture, would actually inspire people to come and join the sport. So we designed a building which pretty much at night can almost emulate the form of a shuttle, but broadly be very functional. And the way the section would work is that you've got this big, massive, large volume, but it's completely isolated. So people who play badminton understand that in an indoor court, you don't want natural light, you don't want natural wind, so it's got to be a shell. And that shell really was the opportunity we had then to really create a court with, of course, you had dormitories which could steal light, you had visual galleries because it was a stadium, You had libraries and theaters because students come here to learn badminton and also educate themselves. And then you have the guest rooms, the coach spaces, with the heart and the core being the central badminton field. So that really was something very interesting for us to work with somebody who's the master of his game and then kind of have that journey with him to work again on a larger program. So last week, I think these are some shots from the last couple of weeks now. So hopefully this is coming up and seeing the light of the day soon, sometime next year. At a slightly larger scale and at a slightly different tangent, we were given an opportunity to work on the old city of Bhubaneshwar. Typically, like most old Indian cities, the old cities are crammed. They have been built with layers and layers of history and energy over time, and practically to a level that the soul, the complete, the reality of where and how the city was formed gets lost. So here we were given this whole idea of having a platform where you had a crazy pilgrimage facility. You had these, it's called the city of temples because it's got about 1,000 temples. You almost could count them few because they were all hidden, buried, broken, removed in time. But you wanted to reinstore that former glory. You had a very large water feature called the Bindu Sagar next to it, which was almost non-visible, non-connected, and you wanted to bring in culture. So for us, it's always very important to start interpreting religion into what its cultural tenets is and something that can speak to today's audience, something that can speak to today's age and time. And so, we almost had to, so there is water on the extreme right end, you can almost see it on the tip, and there is the main Lingaraj complex. And the entire middle is actually slums or old houses, broken houses, but within these broken houses are temples. Kitchens and bathrooms touching temples, temples within houses and living spaces of people. So we really had to figure out a very large rehabilitation scheme and try to get these houses out, to try to re-establish this connection. And so the whole idea was to completely reconnect the water and the temple. And this was a beautiful exercise of a lot of research, looking at functions, looking at services, the infrastructure, and then cleaning up the entire area to almost make all those 1,000 temples emerge back to where they were in the beginning. We had extremely old images, very few references that we could find that, the water was so connected to the temple, you had direct view and access, and you had like a route of multiple temples as you come from water towards Lingaraj. And we really re-established the entire urban fabric to reconnect that entire system. So now suddenly the water had lots of ghats, and gradually the temples would take you up to the main space. So all these plinths, all the entrances were now about 10 feet below ground. So actually the main Lingaraj temple is now almost 8 to 10 feet below. It gets flooded every year. And now you see the plinths were actually outside. So we've practically dug the city by 10 to 12 feet, the entire center of the city. So the entire temple re-emerges and, the program kind of puts together. So whether it was working on ghats or the roads or various facilities around the temple, and of course being architects putting in our bit on various projects around it, we really looked at the entire precinct, the entire ekamvaram as one large complex and thought of it as a program at every level, thought of it as a project from a very small scale of experience to a larger scale. And now, hopefully this will see the light of the day, that the entire heart of old city of Bhubaneshwar is really this one large space, a cultural space for generations. Something that's kept our office very busy and very critically busy because this question of doing something in Bombay. So we are being the architects for about 40 metro stations in Mumbai. Now, when we got to the project, you're dealing with engineers. So you had to really prove to them what architecture can do, how you can solve things architecturally at every level, and it was not meant to be a project where you just put the final skin or the facade, because that's what is understood usually. So the whole experience of how one enters a metro station, the journey that one has, or as an everyday goer, comfort one needs, was all being questioned. And so we dismantled the entire project in various problems, and then we kind of issued or addressed each problem with a potential solution. Most of it being very relevant in its climate and its comfort, and then to be able to take a position saying that let these metro stations be the only non-cluttered thing to a larger clutter that the city has. And I think we've learned it through various examples in India, that how metro stations have been popping up in various places. So, just looking at everything around the skin of the temple and then the skin of the station and the space of the station, to kind of look at where all interventions could be had. Please look at it also from a context that you're dealing with engineers all the time. So they are the ones who call the shots, and it's insanely frustrating. I think that needs another conversation and talk, but what we really try to bring back is looking at everything in its simple form, and then coming up with elements that would make sure there is enough light and air, there is no water, the overhangs, the lures, and then the kind of quality it could come to, that when you have these different lines with its different colors and different stations, it still has some sensibility and cleanliness within the larger context of Mumbai that we all know. So now suddenly, so these are the kind of interventions we did at every level of a metro station. COVID times, we had the great opportunity to work on a very interesting project. It was the city center of Lithuania, the capital city, Vilnius. And it was not just a station, but a project which really told us how to build around culture. Obviously, there could not be site visits because of COVID, one couldn't travel, but through series of experiences, connecting with people, we looked at how the terracotta roofs, which are UNESCO heritage for Vilnius, was being celebrated and looked at as a city of tomorrow across. So the entire project was a very beautiful exercise for us to look at a larger scale and a different context and culture altogether. So it's just to give you a quick review on it. So it's a beautiful old city, a typical European city, and you had an old station. And you had to build around the station a large program to take the new infrastructure, and also the way the city would expand across the road. So one had to look at again program in detail because it wasn't really defined. The only thing that was defined was the space and a broad budget, and we could actually put in various levels of program overall. So you revitalize the entire center because these are programs and projects that give you the opportunity to clean up and energize city centers. All of them are built always around old city rivers or old stations. So it's a Sanskrit word, which is also a Lithuanian word, ugnis, all around fire-clad bricks, to putting light, to putting the warmth here because this snows all the time. So this entire city center was practically developed with that as a central idea. So we took the fabric and made it kind of almost converge into this one city center, and then threw back a new city on the backside, which used to be an industrial town. And that then got revitalized into a massive sports complex, a convention center, and a shopping center with a new face. So suddenly the back became the front, a new front of Vilnius. So it had obviously all the infrastructure, it had bus routes, cycle tracks, pedestrian crossways, and a large infrastructure of the train with this special Baltic line which is connecting the Baltics to the northern Scandinavia to heart of Europe. So lastly for the day, we were also invited to do a strategy for the tourism department of Meghalaya, where we were told to look at various facilities, various things, and propose an urban strategy on how to revitalize the tourism. So we looked at the entire contour. So Shillong is about 2 hours from Guwahati at a driving level, and there are 3 major cities in Meghalaya. And we looked at various heritage, what Meghalaya had. So it was the Cherrapunji Range to the Nokrik Eco Resort or Eco Biosphere, to a lot of wildlife, crazy amount of tribals, etc. So really became a journey for us to come up with somehow very simple inserts. Sometimes you had to conserve animals, to conserving the greens, celebrating breweries. So we did small projects, mid-scale, large and extra large interventions to different spas. So all these kinds of various interventions were proposed by us to give a larger context to how a tourism strategy would work. And this stitched together, backed with numbers, is the way they're gradually now building up a larger tourism base for the state of Meghalaya. And that was very interesting for us because, we had to think on systems. we had to first think of how tourism would develop, how websites or how the promotion needs to happen, to what is the core. And it was really beautiful to go with the journey that one could play with, that it's nature first. So the tourism was not at any cost. It was not at the cost of nature. And that was beautiful for us to be able to be the custodians of that, to be able to sensitize and work on projects which were either for animal care or plant care or nature care, and then bring in the concrete that you would. Here again, we started from the basics. We came with the simplicity of ideology and identity. So this is a city, the second largest city in Meghalaya is called Tura. Tura has this little peak. You see that little dent on that peak. So we identified that, built an identity around it, brought people together to be able to show them what identity can do, how culture can connect, and how it can be done in a modern way. So from bringing in and building an identity of that to a larger strategy at the other level of architectural projects, to be able to then initiate it and make a whole movement, that I thought was a very interesting example for us to explore as a multidisciplinary office. So as you see now in the city, a lot of development is happening. We're developing junctions, roads, projects within it, but with a central theme. So that's pretty much the share of my journey today with all of you, whether it's stationery or small furniture, small architectural projects, or larger commissions of old cities, large metropolitans, or large strategies. This is really my message and our, and our inquiry as an office, that, we are able to connect all these with a kind of a bottom line, a kind of a common thread, because our attitude as an office is really multidisciplinary. To be able to address at every level, not to really tell what architecture is or urban design is or what product design is, but it is all somewhere, somehow connected to be a very multidisciplinary office. Thank you very much.